I'm going to move on now to the next item of business, which is a statement by the Cabinet Secretary Hamza Yousaf on the Scottish Government response to the Auditor General for Scotland's 2018-2019 audit of the Scottish Prison Service. The Cabinet Secretary will take questions after a statement, so I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak buttons as soon as possible. And I call on the Cabinet Secretary, Hamza Yousaf.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. The Auditor General's report on the 2018-19 audit of Scottish Prison Service highlights the significant challenges facing the Scottish Government and the Scottish Prison Service, including the rise in population numbers, budgetary pressures, the demand on prison officers and staff, and the reform of the physical prison estate. Those are challenges which I have acknowledged previously to this Parliament, for example, most recently in my evidence to the Justice Committee for its pre-budget scrutiny. It's worth noting that despite these challenges, in her most recent annual report, Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons for Scotland indicates that she is reassured that despite a rising prison population, staff and prisoners reported feeling safe. However, I recognise the absolute seriousness of the issues raised by the Auditor General and the pressures we face, and I'm keen to work with members from across this Parliament to address those concerns. It may be helpful if I set out some of the actions that we have already taken. I'll begin with budget. As noted by the Auditor General, the SPS revenue budget, as with other public bodies, has been constrained over recent years. This was during a time that the prison population was falling and SPS were operating within or, on many occasions, below their annual allocation. Going into 1920, we acknowledged that the SPS faced a number of uncertainties in its budget. These uncertainties included pay, pension costs, and the costs associated with the rising numbers of prisoners within their care. As a result, an additional £24 million has been made available this year to help SPS meet a range of cost pressures. I'll continue to keep the budget position under review throughout the remainder of this year. Budget allocations for next year are being considered as part of the current budget process. This includes consideration of the factors that gave rise to additional funding being provided to SPS this year. Presiding Officer, many of the challenges raised in the Auditor General's report are a consequence of the rapid increase in the prison population that began in 2018. While crime, including violent crime, has fallen considerably in the last decade, we know that the nature of the offending being prosecuted through the courts has changed over that period, including more focus on serious organised crime and sexual offending, including historical cases and those committed online. This means that the average length of custodial sentence imposed is at its highest in the last 10 years, increasing by 21% since 2008-09. This, along with other factors such as longer minimum punishment parts for life sentences, the ending of automatic early release for the most dangerous offenders, and a reduction in the use of home detention curfew, have contributed to Scotland now locking up a greater proportion of its people than any other nation in Western Europe. I have been unequivocal. This is not a statistic to be proud of. Far from it. It's a stain on our collective conscience as a country. While prison will always remain the best option and the most appropriate option for some of the most serious offenders, we know that these numbers are far too high, and we've been working closely with justice partners to take forward a range of progressive measures aimed at bringing these numbers down and easing pressure on our prisons. Firstly, we know from evidence that short-term sentences simply do not work in terms of rehabilitating an individual. Individuals released from a custodial sentence 12 months or less are reconvicted nearly twice as often as those given a community payback order. So that is why we brought forward to this Parliament the presumption against short sentences to extend the current presumption against short periods of imprisonment for sentences for 3 months or less to sentences of 12 months or less. Secondly, Presiding Officer, the Management of Offenders Act included provisions to expand the availability of electronic monitoring alongside community sentences as alternatives to custody. Thirdly, the Scottish Government, SPS, the Risk Management Authority and partners have worked to develop revised operational guidance and processes for the release of prisoners on home detention curfew. In addition, we've asked Community Justice Scotland to take forward work with local authorities to collect information on the local availability of community justice services that can be shared with sentencers to help inform sentencing decisions. Finally, in our programme for government 2019, there is included a commitment to undertake work to review the law on bail and remand. The Scottish Government has issued a commission for research to better understand the factors driving the relative use of bail and remand. These are just some examples of progressive reforms this government is undertaking to address the challenges and reduce the number of people in our custody. Moving on, Presiding Officer, to the physical prison estate. Since 2007, we've invested almost £600 million in the prison estate across Scotland. This investment has delivered 3 new prisons, Lomoss, Addywell and Grampian, and a significant refurbishment of existing prisons, including Pullman, Edinburgh, Glenorchy, Shotts and Perth. In terms of our current priorities, delivering the bold and progressive plans for the new women's custodial estate is vital. Our plans to create community custody units to sit alongside a smaller national facility reflect the recommendations made by the Commission on Women Offenders and will be more responsive to the specific needs of women in prison. Work is well underway, and SPS aim to deliver the first of 2 local community custodial units in Dundee and Glasgow by the end of 2021. We know concerns have been raised about the physical condition in parts of HMP Barlinnie, and the replacement of HMP Barlinnie is also one of our priorities. The preferred site at the former gasworks at Provan Mill for the replacement facility was confirmed by the SPS earlier this year, and they're taking forward an application for an outline planning consent. In the meantime, we've committed to consider proposals for additional funding to help deal with immediate infrastructure issues at Barlinnie ahead of the replacement prison being completed. I appreciate members are as keen as the Scottish Government and the SPS to get these new facilities up and running, but as with any other significant infrastructure investment, there are many factors at play here that affect the timetabling for large and complex infrastructure projects, including the commercial marketplace and due diligence factors. But I can assure members that we're working at pace to deliver these new facilities. Ongoing investment in our prison estate will ensure that it's fit for purpose for the future, with modern infrastructure enabling maintenance of safe, stable and secure environments that we should be rightly proud of in Scotland's prisons. In terms of staffing, the Auditor General's report discusses some of the pressures being faced by hard-working prison officers and staff working in our prisons. I'm sure the entire Chamber will want to put on record our appreciation for the tough job that prison officers are doing. They're dealing with the most vulnerable people in our society and facing an increasingly complex prison population on a daily basis. They do that job with great professionalism, and I am greatly appreciative of their efforts. One of the areas highlighted in the Auditor General's report around staff was the increase in sickness amongst prison officers. This rise is largely attributable to mental health related conditions, and there are multiple contributory factors which are triggering illnesses, both inside and outside the workplace, and the SPS is taking forward a range of measures through its employee wellbeing policy to support officers in their challenging roles. These measures include, to name just a few, lifestyle screening with physical health checks, a critical incident response and support process, an employee assistant programme, which is a free 24-hour confidential support service, providing telephone and face-to-face counselling, and an online health platform with multiple tools to monitor and improve wellbeing. Both HMP Inverness and HMP and YOI Grampian are showing a downward trend in the number of staff working days lost due to sickness, and the SPS continue to work hard to maintain this trend. I've seen firsthand some of the challenges our prison officers face on a day-to-day basis, and that's why I'm pleased that SPS management, unions and staff reached agreement in relation to a recent pay offer. This was a significant offer which exceeded rises in previous years and pay deals across the public sector and in comparison to counterparts in England and Wales. It rightly reflects the hard work and dedication of our prison officers, whose work is difficult, often dangerous, and largely unseen by the wider public. In closing, Presiding Officer, I'd like to extend really an invitation to every member in this chamber. Today I've set out some of the wide-ranging measures this government has undertaken to bring about reform to the justice system and to bring about the changes we want to see in a progressive society. But we are clear we have to go further. We want prisons to continue to be used to detain and rehabilitate those who present the biggest threat to our communities, alongside robust community alternatives and interventions to keep those for whom prison is not the best option out of our prisons. But we know from the evidence in international comparisons that there's no silver bullet, there's no magic wand that can help to solve this complex, multifaceted and wider societal challenge that we see in our prisons. I believe in the cross-portfolio, multi-agency and collaborative approach this government is taking forward. And again, my invitation to those here in the chamber today is to be part of the solutions and reform. My door has been and will continue to be open to members with ideas and resolutions to these challenges. But we must find a solution to these challenges. And I, as Cabinet Secretary for Justice, am determined that we do.
Thank you very much, Cabinet Secretary. The Cabinet Secretary will now take questions. The first from Liam Kerr.
Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. The Auditor General's report made for pretty grim reading, highlighting that the SPS is facing threats to its financial sustainability and its operational safety and effectiveness. Prison staff, who are the bedrock of the system, are facing serious challenges. Serious prisoner assaults on staff are double the 2016-17 number. Stress-related sickness rose by a third in 2018-19, with the average number of days lost now 17, and existing staff working vastly increased hours. Through care, an aid to the rehabilitation we all desire has had to cease due to lack of officers. Rehabilitation will be greatly assisted by work and education, yet the number of hours provided dropped by nearly 300,000 in 2017-18 to its lowest level since 2011. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary, what steps are being taken to address the lack of workforce planning, particularly HMP Grampian, where 80% of the vacancies exist? When can we expect that to yield results so the SPS can reintroduce through care and rehabilitation opportunities? And will they at least consider the rollout of body-worn cameras to protect prison officers?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I thank Liam Kerr for some very important questions? And can I agree with him? I think it did make for very grim reading. I don't doubt that. I hope I've set that out clearly here, but also made clear my intentions that we work, we invest to hopefully bring down those pressures on our prison service. What I say on the violence that is facing prison officers, we do have a more complex population within our prisons. There's no doubt at all that we have more serious organised criminals. I have been into SPSH quarters to look at the important work that's done by the operations team there to make sure that various crime groups are kept separate in various different facilities. It is a very complex job, but one that SPS are doing well. All that being said, the most serious prisoner on staff violence numbers have actually gone down from 2017-18 to 2018-19, but of course one assault, one serious assault is one serious assault too many. So on his question of body-worn cameras, I will ask him to do as he asks me. I will keep an open mind to exploring that issue with both the prison service, but also with the Prison Officers Association. It's fair to say from my last conversations with the POA in Scotland, they were not particularly persuaded. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't explore the issue. I will do that. And I have raised it before with Scottish Prison Service, but I'll commit to do that again, because I can see in many instances where it could be a welcome move. So I will keep an open mind to that. In terms of the workforce planning issue, I think Liam Kerr is right to raise that. There's a particular issue, as he knows, in Grampian, which is a prison I'm sure he'll be familiar with from his region that he represents. I have, in my last conversation with the Chief Executive of the Prison Service, spoken to him at great length and detail about those workforce challenges, have given him an offer to speak to me as we go into that spending review post the elections, post the UK government budget, about where he thinks there may be a case for further investment in the staff. I will look upon that favourably. The challenges in Grampian are difficult, he'll know, because of the geography, but I'd be happy for SPS, and I'd be happy to meet with the member, but SPS, to meet with the member, to speak to him in more detail about what can be done, particularly for Grampian.
Thank you. James Kelly, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and I thank the Cabinet Secretary for advance sight of his statement. The Auditor General's report is indeed a serious one and highlights the crisis in overcrowding in Scottish prisons. The reality is our prisons are bursting at the seams, and at the same time the revenue budget has been reduced by £50 million over the last 4 years. The Government's response to this has lacked urgency. Recently, when the Justice Committee visited Barlinnie Prison, we were shocked at the substandard conditions there. So can I ask the Cabinet Secretary specifically what action will be taken to deal with the unacceptable situation at Barlinnie, where over 90% of the prisoners are being housed in double occupied cells which were designed for single occupancy, and also the position where there are only 5 cells available for disabled prisoners, only 1 with wheelchair access?
Cabinet Secretary.
Can I first of all just try to just give some balance to what I thought was, on the whole, reasonable points being made by James Kelly, but it is important, I think, I bring some balance. I wouldn't classify what we have in our prisons as a crisis. I would certainly say there's challenges, and they are significant challenges, but it is down to the hard work and dedication of our prison officers that we still have, as the Chief Inspector has said, prisons that are well maintained and of course are safe both for the staff and also the prisoners. So I think that's important. That is not to downplay the seriousness. I agree with his assessment. There's an extremely serious report from the Auditor General. In terms of the revenue point as well, just very briefly, as I said in my statement, of course, the prison population was falling over the decade, and SPS were coming in either within budget or in some cases even under budget as well. I don't agree with him that we haven't shown a degree of urgency. For this financial year that we're currently in, the offer I made to SPS was that we would keep their budget under review, and where those pressures came to light, then we would fund and fund those pressures. We have to the tune of 24 million, as I've already explained in the statement. On his final substantive point, I do agree with him. I have been, of course, to Barlinnie. I share the reservations that James Kelly shares. I do not think that the facilities we have there, particularly when the prison is almost 150% over capacity, frankly, the facilities that we should be proud of in a modern, progressive country, they are simply not designed to cope with that prison population, the size of what it is at the moment. To give them some reassurance, I've asked SPS to come to me with some proposals around what interim measures, because with the best will in the world, we know Barlinnie won't be ready for a number of years yet. The new Barlinnie won't be ready for a number of years yet. So therefore, if we can invest in interim measures to improve the healthcare facilities, the reception facilities, or any other facilities that the Scottish Prison Service deem need urgent attention, then I will explore that with an absolute open mind.
Rona Mackay to be followed by Liam MacArthur.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. We know that there's a complex range of factors causing an increase in prison population, and that's why it's vital that Parliament continues to back the Scottish Government's progressive justice reforms. Can the Cabinet Secretary expand on what work has been taken forward to ease pressures on the prison population, including female offenders in particular?
Cabinet Secretary.
I thank Rona Mackay for the question. There's a whole range of progressive reforms, and I think I touched upon some of them in my statement. I was pleased that the majority of this Parliament got behind the presumption against short sentences. That will affect disproportionately women, and of course, a good way. We know, if I remember correctly, the figures are in around 90% of those women in our prison estate are in for prison sentences of less than 12 months or less. I think also our investment in community alternatives to custody will also yield positive results, particularly when it comes to the female population as well. I do think also there is not one single, as I mentioned in my statement, one silver bullet that will fix the prison population or lower the prison population significantly. What we have to be willing to do is look at really radical and bold measures, and some of those will be uncomfortable to discuss in this chamber. But I think we have to have an exploration discussion of these matters, of these factors, if we want to see a reduction in our prison population. But we can only do that by being progressive. The moment we begin to become knee-jerk, often in the face of some terrible tragedies, or indeed we begin to become regressive, then I'm afraid that prison population will simply increase as opposed to decrease.
Liam MacArthur, to be followed by Fulton McGregor.
Thanks, President Officer. I'd like to thank the Cabinet Secretary for early sight of the statement on what is a very grim report from the Auditor General. As others have said, prison population has soared, self-harm and suicides are increasing, the SPS's through care services have been abolished, and yet in the statement there don't appear to be any new or radical proposals to respond to the Auditor General's report, or indeed what I think anybody has to accept as a mounting crisis in our prison system. Given the pressure staff are now under, given they were promised a share of 800 extra mental health professionals, and given the lack of detail around how those would be distributed, and we've asked the Information Commissioner to intervene, can the Cabinet Secretary tell us today how many extra mental health staff there will ultimately be in our prisons?
Cabinet Secretary.
I don't have that figure right to hand, but I will make sure that I write to Liam MacArthur with some of that detail. But I know there has been additional investment in mental health staff within our prison estate. I take the issue extremely seriously. It's why I asked Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons in Scotland to look at the issue of mental health, particularly in Polmont prison, because it affects, of course, our youngest, most vulnerable people within our care. So I do take the issue of mental health extremely seriously. I also take the issue of the mental health of our staff extremely seriously as well, and I hope I've given some detail in the statement and some reassurance in the statement of what SPS is doing to try to help assist members of staff with any mental health conditions, stress, problems that may arise from working within the prison estate. So I do take the point seriously. And this point about through care, I also take that extremely seriously. It's why this government worked really closely with the third sector in order to see where they could come in where the through care service was suspended by SPS, and they had to use those experienced prison officers back in the main prison estate. I was pleased that with the agreement the third sector were able to step in. That is a temporary measure, and of course if we manage to reduce the prison population, we can have a further discussion on how things can progress thereafter.
Fulton McGregor, to be followed by Margaret Mitchell.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Does the Cabinet Secretary agree that prisons should be managed by the public sector and not run for profit by private companies? The fact that we have private prisons is a legacy from previous administrations. Can the Cabinet Secretary tell us how much PFI contracts of HMP Addiewell and HMP Kilmarnock has cost the public purse?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, that's a good point. I mean, with the budgetary pressures that we face, those unitary charges on our private prisons are pretty eye-watering. I have always said, and this government has always maintained, that prisons should be very much run from the public, not for private profit. We haven't built private prisons. They were, of course, commissioned before this government came into power, and when the contract expires, let me be absolutely unequivocal that those prisons will come back into the public sphere and back into public ownership. The unitary charges for each of the private prisons within the estate are Kilmarnock is now totaled over, in the course of the contract, will be 368 million, Addiewell 955 million, so also over 1.2 billion over 1.3 billion, in fact, on those unitary charges, which is an eye-watering cost for both those prisons. Again, underlining why prisons should be run in the public space as opposed for private profit.
Margaret Mitchell, to be followed by John Mason.
The Scottish Government's presumption against short-term sentences of 3 months or less, and now 12 months or less, relies heavily on community payback orders and other alternatives to custody working effectively. Given the success of these orders, and other alternatives to custody relies heavily on the third and voluntary sectors being adequately funded to deliver these programmes, will the Cabinet Secretary commit to ensuring that these third sector and voluntary organisations have sustainable 3-year funding delivered directly to them rather than through local authorities, which are competitors.
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, Margaret Mitchell will be aware, of course, of the challenges that we face from our budget, of course, in a decade of austerity, and we'll see what the general election brings and what the budget will be. But I suspect that we'll just get a one-year budget from the UK government as opposed to a multi-annual budget, and therefore it becomes difficult for us to be able to do a three-year budget because of those constraints. So, of course, I'm sure I'll reflect those conversations with the Finance Secretary. Her wider point is one that is not lost on me at all. I think the third sector are important partners when it comes to community alternatives to custody. We'll continue to engage with them. They are represented in part of the work that we do in and around the Community Justice Leadership Group. So I'll continue to engage with them and listen to their concerns in and around financing and resource.
John Mason, to be followed by Alec Rowley.
Thanks very much. The Cabinet Secretary mentioned reconviction in his statement, and I wonder if he could say anything about what we can do with people coming out of prison to make sure they integrate with the community again and not get into the wrong crowd. Cabinet Secretary.
Well, it's a really important point, because what we want to essentially do is stop that cycle of reoffending from happening over and over again. So going back to Margaret Mitchell's point, we provide money to the third sector, 3.4 million annually to the third sector to support through care services for men and for women. But on top of that, this idea of ensuring that people don't go back into that cycle of reoffending is why we have to look at things like home detention curfew. That is about reintegrating people back into the community and testing that reintegration in the community. And of course, we know for the very good reasons why a review was conducted into home detention curfew and why there was changes made to home detention curfew. But it is measures such as that can be challenging, that can be controversial, that are much needed, and a whole range of measures like that needed in order to test people into the community with minimal risk, because the job of the Risk Management Authority and others, of course, being done no doubt properly. These are needed so that we can hope to break the cycle of reoffending.
Alec Rowley, to be followed by Shona Robertson.
Presiding Officer, I note that the Cabinet Secretary has acknowledged the hard work and the dedication of prison staff. He's also acknowledged the pressure that those staff are under. Can I say to him that a wage increase, whilst welcome, won't actually resolve these major issues? I recently met with staff from Perth Prison, and they basically described a situation to me where staff morale is at rock bottom. They described a situation where staff are stressed, they're under pressure, anxiety, as he acknowledges himself. And in terms of sickness, they're added to the pressure because the lack of cover for those who are sick. And the pressures that are put on where prisoners are kept in their cells for far, far too long. All this bubbling up into a pressure pot that they're frightened is going to blow. So my question would be, do we need more staff in our prison service? Has there been a proper analysis done of the levels of staffing and the required levels of staffing? And are we actually going to take the action to put in place a proper workplace staffing programme that will ensure these prisons are adequately staffed?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, thank Alex Rowley for that important question. I also join him in paying dedication to the hard work of the staff at HMP Perth and across our prison estate. We recognise that hard work. That's why we did bring forward and help to fund, of course, an extremely ambitious, but I'm pleased, a pay award that recognises that difficult job that prison officers do. I mean, a 14% pay rise over the next 3 years is, I think, a significant recognition of that hard work, and particularly in comparison to England and Wales, where the pay rise is only anywhere between 2.2% and 3%, depending on what band you're in. That doesn't take away from the points that Alex Rowley makes about the pressure points that exist within our prison service. Part of the pay award was to look at staff sicknesses. Part of the pay award and the agreement with the POA in particular was to look at how we can reduce those staff sicknesses. And I've mentioned some of the mental health measures that the SPS have put in place to help to tackle mental health issues amongst prison officers. Interestingly, of course, a number of staff days are also lost. I think it's around about 15,000 per annum due to physical pressures on the job as well, musculoskeletal problems that are faced by prison officers. And two things I would say in relation to that. One is I am aghast at the fact that the UK government, when it made its reforms to civil service pensions, did not include prison officers in that. So prison officers, because of that omission by the UK government, now have to work till they're 68, which I think is a ridiculous notion. But also the second point I'd make on that is that SPS is investing in, for example, physio and in a number of other initiatives that will help with some of those physical pressures in the job. And we're already seeing that there, where they're being piloted, they're having a positive impact on reducing staff sicknesses. The direct answer to this question about additional staff, as I mentioned in my previous answer to another question, was I've spoken to the Chief Executive of SPS, as I frequently do, and I've said to him, if this is a question of additional staff that is needed, then I would expect a proposal to come forward from the Scottish Prison Service, and we will look at that, and I will discuss that with the Finance Secretary when it comes.
I would just point out there are 4 other members still waiting patiently to ask questions if we can get through them. Shona Robertson, to be followed by Maurice Corrie.
While we should never be complacent about the challenges facing our prisons, does the Cabinet Secretary agree with Wendy Sinclair-Gibbon, the Chief Inspector of Prisons for Scotland, who said in the introduction to the 2018-19 annual report that I am reassured to see that levels of violence, self-harm and prison suicide, although rising, have not risen as drastically as they did under similar conditions in the English prison service. Why does the Cabinet Secretary think that's the case?
Cabinet Secretary.
I do agree with what Shona Robertson said. All that being said, although the Chief Inspector did say that, I think it's important to put it on the record. For me, I'm not satisfied that we are quite, I'm not satisfied at the level of mental health problems, issues, concerns, self-harming, suicides that we have in our prison estate. I don't think we should ever be complacent about that. We should never be satisfied with the levels that we have. We should continue to want to do more to reduce these terrible incidents, particularly of those of self-harm and suicide. And in relation to the question that Lee MacArthur asked, I managed to find the statistic, the numbers, that we have 19 additional members of staff that are deployed within our prisons, and of course we'll continue to invest in the number of mental health staff within our prison estate. That's certainly one thing that we can do. The member will be aware that I asked Her Majesty's Chief Inspector of Prisons to look at the issue of mental health within HMP and YOI Polmont. She'll also be aware of the mental health review that is being taken forward by the government, by my colleagues, the Cabinet Secretary for Health and the Minister for Mental Health, and prisons will be within that remit as well. So there are a range of things that we're looking to do, certainly not complacent, and we'll look to see what the reviews come back to tell us. We'll continue to invest in mental health staff within our prison service, but certainly one incident of self-harm, one incident of suicide is one too many.
There's still 3 more members, so succinct questions and answers, please. Maurice Corrie, followed by Emma Harper.
Presiding Officer, Barlinnie Prison is currently operating over capacity with prisoners, doubling up in cells, which cannot help rehabilitation. Barlinnie's age means that there is a high risk currently of failure in some parts of the building, such as the drainage and the sewage systems. Can I ask the Cabinet Secretary what contingency plans are in place in case of events like these, and how long does he envisage prisoners having to share cells?
Cabinet Secretary.
I can give a reassurance to Maurice Corrie that there are contingency plans in place. There are contingencies if, for example, there was a really catastrophic failure in our prisons that required additional spaces to be found. They are not contingencies that would give us, I think, much comfort in the sense that you're looking at more doubling up of cells, you're looking at using space that is currently being used for things like rehabilitation, like leisure within the prison estate. So I would rather that we didn't get into that position where we had the catastrophic failure, as Maurice Corrie mentioned. I'd rather we one, invested in our prison service, which we are doing, and even when it comes to interim measures, for example, in Berlin, I look to do favourably. But secondly, the answer to the problem, the conundrum, the question is exactly as Maurice Corrie suggests and alludes to, is that the way around this is to reduce the prison population. And I say this with all seriousness to my colleagues in the Conservative benches. I know this is a political issue for them, but it is only by being progressive on this agenda, while of course maintaining public safety and public protection, and I don't think the two are mutually exclusive, by being progressive in this agenda, are we going to see a reduction in the numbers of people coming into our prison? If we do that, then of course we hopefully will not have to take some of the more undesirable measures that we may have to take in terms of contingency.
Emma Harper.
The Cabinet Secretary will be aware that many young people who are being held on remand or in custody are taken to HMYY Polmont. I had a constituent whose family struggled to visit their son because of the financial costs associated with travelling from the borders to Polmont. Can the Cabinet Secretary provide assurances that appropriate support will be put in place for families affected by imprisonment, both in terms of well-being and practical support?
Cabinet Secretary.
Yeah, well, we are very pleased, of course, to fund prisoner visitor centres in our prisons, and I've visited a number of them myself and can see the good work that they do. But Emma Harper's point is not lost to me. I know the SPS has established a family strategy group with an improvement plan in place. My understanding was that there was also a scheme in place that can help when it comes to families who wish to visit those members of the family that are in our prison estate. I will write to Emma Harper and make sure she has more details of that, so it can perhaps help her constituent in this case.
Thank you. And Edward Mountain.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. HMP Inverness is overflowing, and Cabinet Secretary, you bought a new site for HMP Highland at vast expense, but you haven't said yet when work will start on it. Are you able to do so now?
Cabinet Secretary.
Well, as I've said in my statement, the priority, and I hope Edward Mountain isn't suggesting that I should be deprioritising the female custodial estate, because that is currently the priority. But by pushing and suggesting that HMP Inverness should be funded right now for the next phase, there is a priority list there. And of course, HMP Inverness is within that priority, but I hope you'd understand that the female custodial estate can't be deprioritised because of HMP Inverness, and neither can HMP Ballinnie be deprioritised because of HMP Inverness. So there is an infrastructure plan there, which is there on absolute need, is there in terms of what our priorities are. HMP Inverness is certainly in amongst those top priorities, but I would hope that Edward Mountain isn't suggesting that we deprioritise the female custodial estate, because that's simply something I'm not willing to do.
Thank you very much, and that concludes our statement on the audit of the prison service. We're going to move on shortly to the next item of business. We'll just take a pause to allow ministers to change seats.